And we're discussing it and think tanking it?
Both. Both. Yeah, both. Because I would say that, for all this stuff, clearly I've given it some thought. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that I have or presenting like solid answers. When I do think if there's some solid ideas, I present them. It's just, but most of these things have to do, most of the questions I've been trying to frame are to make the connection, number one, to the building fight. Number two, make the connection between building fight and capital through the Polylux Marx reading. But then there are deeper questions about how to move forward the Jackson-Cush plan under the present conditions and how to fulfill it.
Okay.
And so there's questions of scale, scope. There's questions of agency, like who are the primary agents, that need to be in play and have to be in play for some of these things to, come into being. And then how do we deal with what I meant by the question of transition? How and can we move from, the capitalist commodity-based economy as a cooperative, trying to create its own supply and value chain? How do we not get stuck in capitalist logic? Are there ways to work out of it, in practical things that we can do that focus first and foremost on solidarity, and then how do you transition solidarity into something different and not just something that's like a separate, distinct circuit of capital that seems to be autonomous, but actually maybe only just adding value to a certain, like creating a bubble for a small little group of people, but that doesn't necessarily wind up being transformative or challenging in any way to capital. So that's what a lot of these questions are. And the bottom line is there's some thinking, there's some history, but I think there's a lot of things that, given new circumstances, we don't know. I don't know if there's nobody who knows the answer to some of these questions. So like the community production stuff and how all that's tied in with the overall scope of the fourth industrial revolution, from cryptocurrency, to DNA encoding, all of that is on a thread of the use of knowledge and technology as a new form of production in a way that humanity has never done to this point. May have thought about it, but we didn't have the actual tools to start doing that type of manipulation until the last 50 years at most.
All this Huxley shit.
Yeah. So that's to answer you. So some of it is like, let's think tank together and let's figure it out. And then the purpose of like doing these recordings and still going to look for systems to be able to bring in other people. There's folks from, the Friends of Cooperation Jackson in general who want to join in, who I think have a lot to add. And I think this question of transition is a serious one. So thank you for the question. So I hope it's clarifying to everybody what's going on here. And then the next piece really is what we had said and what we want to work towards is building a local and a national, and I would say international think tank that works on doing these PEs, at least from 2018 forward, in a much more collaborative, cooperative way, where we're looking at a number of questions together. And one of the things I know I want to work on, so I got another proposal similar to the one that you responded to for Sonia. Thanks for responding. In addition to building like a national community to do, help us do film nights, and it's part of our broader community PE. One of the things I want to set up for next year is once a month, us dialoguing with international folks who are also doing, social and solidarity economy work in some form or fashion, so that we can start doing direct international exchanges and skill shares, skill swaps, online. We have too much technology at our fingertips and know too many people to not, we're like kind of wasting opportunities for folks who want to connect and add on skills. So I don't want to rush in to do that right now. We got 6 months, kind of 5 months left to plan some of this stuff out and recruit people who want to do it. And so we'll, plan out between now and say December, plan out 12 of them. So there's one for each month. We do it, but we know by December what the 12 will be, right? And the people have time to prepare and do all that other kind of stuff. So that's another extension to your question of like, how are you guys dealing? What are your questions you are facing in Italy, or what are questions you facing in Zimbabwe, or Senegal, where there's a lot of, cooperatives and folks who are not just doing like cooperative work, but also engaged in the social struggle, trying to find those parallels, because there's some folks we know who just do cooperatives who are not linked to any broader social struggle. And we can learn a lot from them too, but it's not the exact same. That's different than what we're doing, where the two are automatically related. But today I wanted to actually start with a number one. Said we was going to go deeper on number one. I wanted to actually, for us to all break out paper and calculators to look at this food sovereignty question more deeply. And for folks who are maybe watching this, video later, check out the questions that were posted on Facebook and email. In terms of reading, the readings are the Build and Fight essay, the Jackson Kush Plan, Jackson Just Transition Plan, and the Polylux Marks. That's what we are working with for folks who want to have some background. So I'll read the question just so it's on the video. How will our quest for food sovereignty in Jackson enable us to effectively pursue our quest to gradually displace the capitalist economy in Jackson through exponential displacement? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this approach? So what I wanted us to do today, what I was saying, folks can break out calculators and all that other kind of stuff, is let's do a collective thought exercise, which was interesting why you answered that question. A collective thought exercise, which is there's other ways to formulate this, but one of the strongest things I've seen in two different forms, one I shared with the Freedom Farms, I think last year, was a methodology and a plan to be able to feed 20,000 people on 5 acres of land. Do you remember that, Vasanya, that piece? And I've seen that written in other ways and written out. But let's assume, 20,000 people on 5 acres of land.
20,000 people on 5 acres.
Right?
For a day?
No.
No. Realistically, to feed a family, you can feed a family with a 1/4 acre or less for an entire year. You can build a sustainable homestead. There are actually plans based off of models that have been enacted. All you need is 1 entire acre and enough room to rotate the different facilities, but you can.
Is that permaculture?
No.
Some elements of
but
it.
it's some elements of it. But you can literally, if you have 1 square acre, you can support your entire diet sustainably all year round for a family of 4 to 6, something like that. And that's like all your dietary needs. Yeah, it's fascinating. So 5 acres, 20,000 people, that's easy. It's intensive, but it's easy.
So scale and scope question, which we've been dealing with, right, in the context of the Jackson Kush Plan. Let's do the math. 5 acres, 20,000 people, okay? 200,000 people in Jackson. How many acres of land would it take to feed 200,000 people?
50 acres.
How many, can somebody look up how many acres of land are in the city limits? city confines of Jackson. I haven't looked it up at all.
I remember.
That reminds me of something I want to go about land and acreage. Something I want to show you.
Good. So 50 acres, 200,000 people, just so the folks didn't hear that. Who might be watching this, and we're looking up, folks are hopefully looking up.
I
What's
see
the acreage?
106.8 square miles. Somebody can do the conversion. 107 square miles in Jackson.
107 square miles in Jackson.
Just have to do the conversion for acres to miles, whatever that is. Square mile.
106 acres in square mile?
Yeah.
No, 640.
No, I'm saying it's 107 square miles in Jackson. We have to convert that to whatever.
68,480 acres.
68,000.
480.
480.
Okay, and then we would need to look at, in this quest for food sovereignty, we would then have to make some distinctions between how much of that is available as opposed to how much of that is quote unquote developed, right? Be that housing, be that some commercial retail, be that pavement or highways. You know, we would have to make some estimates and then get some actuals in terms of the plan to distinguish how much of that acreage and how much of that square mileage space is actually developed. And I would imagine that, and this is just a guess, but I would imagine that given the number of vacant properties in Jackson, given the degree of open space in general in Jackson, how spread out things are, that at least 1/4 of that 68,500, approximate acres of land is available, to be cultivated. I'm not gonna say farm, but cultivated in some concrete fashion. How much of 1/4? How many acres is 1/4?
17,125 acres.
17,000.
Approximately.
So that means just if we were following that 50 square acres could feed 200,000 people formula. Let's do the math on how many, following that formula, how many people could what was it, 17,000 acres?
Yeah, 17.
How many people by that formula could 17,000 acres potentially feed?
Just real quick, are we certain that 5 acres? Because when I hear 1 acre for a family of 4 or 6, I'm struggling to see how 5 is going to.
No, 1 acre is the entirety of the property. That includes your house, that includes water catchment, that includes everything.
Yeah, not the entirety.
1/4 acre of,
Okay.
Agricultural yield.
So we feel good about that 5 acres with 20,000 people. That's
68 million. If I did that right.
what's that?
How many people before we have the acreage could be? Because 17,000. No, wait, hold on. Because that's square. No, that's just acres. Yeah. 17,000 acres divided by 5 is some number. 5 times 20,000 is
200,000.
200.
Oh, no, wait a minute. 20, I give you 20. You had it right. And we can come back and fix the math.
4,000 per acre.
4,000 per acre
Times 17.
times 17,000. Quick way to do it.
68,400. $68,480,000.
68 million, same number. The Joe got.
68 million?
68 million, how much? For,
480,000.
that's a square acre, so is that also how many people?
That's how many
That's how
people.
many people. 68,480,000. Like even. I mean, I'm rounding a little bit, but
That's how many people, 17,125 acres. Gotcha.
68 million people?
Using that formula.
That's crazy.
Not necessarily.
68.5 million people.
Not necessarily. Remember, easily over half of the food that's produced in this country goes in the trash. It never even makes it to market.
Yeah.
It's just disposed of, right? And I've seen some studies that the actual amount of land in the United States that's being used to produce food is, what was it? What did it say? It was less. It was less the you can fit all of it in the state of Vermont, if I remember the study correctly. Like that is producing all of the agriculture yield in the United States now is roughly about the size of Vermont.
Wow.
When you really add it up and what's in like in active productive use. Now, if you add in how much is used to feed animals, then it grows, a little bit exponentially. Because most of your corn and wheat is actually used to now, at least in the United States, used to feed cattle.
and produce oil.
Yeah, and fructose corn syrup, and other deadly chemicals. So, I mean, when you look at that, but my point is, when you look at that, we shouldn't really, to a certain extent, be shocked.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And we got to remember we exist in food in the commodities market. Tomatoes have to look a certain way if they even put them on the shelf. Oblong looking tomatoes probably just as good as a round red tomato, right? There's no, but that's just how they've conditioned our mind and conditioned the market to be like, this is what a tomato is, or et cetera.
Everything.
Yeah.
Every freaking thing is conditioned to look a certain way.
Right.
Um,
And if it's not, yeah.
There's a thing with bananas where they're worried that the particular variety of bananas that you can get in the grocery store right now is going to go extinct because of some illness.
Right. That's
Which
also
means they're going to have to start a massive campaign because the other viable breed that's immune to whatever this disease is doesn't look anything like what we think a banana looks like. It's like it's a different color or something like that. And they had to do that
bananas
in
are
the
naturally
50s.
green, yeah.
And they had to do that in the 50s too when they changed to the current variety of banana. But it's ridiculous because that's one of the things that's holding us up is the fact that McDade's doesn't want it if it doesn't look like your perfect, like, fake picture toy tomato.
Right.
Yeah.
So considering all that, right? Do we think this is the winds up becoming a political question? So you do the math, then it becomes political questions. We have that much acreage, clearly, in Jackson. So what would it take for us to become food sovereignty? Clearly, it's not a question, I would argue, of land. If it's not a question of land, then what is it a question of?
I would say like cultivation techniques. Because, like, I don't know if you went over the questions yet in the email.
We just on number one.
Oh.
That's what we touching on.
Well, like we just kind of stated that food is kind of fetishized. It's not like what it is, and it's cultivated for the market. It's not cultivated to people. So, yeah, we don't need that much land to actually become, I feel like, sustainable in food production.
Mhm. So one, you put up there's cultivation methods. Two, I think you alluded to public perception and market perception, social conditioning, really, around markets.
Well, like the
Anything
farm
else?
practices used the last 50 years.
Mhm.
Probably even going back further.
Public perception, what are you saying with the public perception? That's basically re-education of people. And, you know, one of the biggest stumbling blocks towards it is labor, is willing participants in the cultivation.
There you go. There you go.
You know, if we had the willing participants, we can make it happen.
So, what else before we get into his answers? What else is a
Well, I mean, I think
limitation?
one major obstacle is that even though 17,125 acres are theoretically available for cultivation, the private ownership of land,
Right.
how do we get the land?
Right.
How do we free up this land or achieve use of this land that's in various states of growth and various states of ownership?
That's another piece. So
How much
really,
of the land is actually cultivated though?
we just did
And
1/4.
various states of pollution.
Yeah, we just did 1/4.
Mind backing up?
So even if
I'll send you the link.
you
Yeah,
reduce that 1/4 by half, right? You can still feed all the people in Jackson. Eat clearly,
Right.
So
right?
we have
But
enough land.
you got enough land. Land is not the question.
Well, I would be having it. The only thing is about getting the workers to be able to get out of the ground.
Well, it's two things. That's what. It's a number of different things that I would come to. So Joby touched on one, and Brian touched on the other one, right? And both of them I would say are equally important, because how land is owned and how it can be used is a critical embedded structure of capitalism, right? And then how labor is then therefore used, right? Does labor own the land?
No.
Typically not, right?
It's the landlord.
The landlord. So, if we want to get food sovereign, we're gonna have to figure out a way to create a new type of landlord. That's the political point I want to try to really get to cut through the chase, right? You got to have a new type of landlord, and you got to have new labor relations, new labor organization,
Free the land, free the people.
right? So the way we are presently organized socially in this city is the greatest barrier to us becoming, I would argue, would be my argument, is the greatest barrier to us becoming food sovereign. Because even though there's a ton of land all around this neighborhood alone that could be used, it's all privately owned for the most part, privately or government owned, right? And so let's just say we found some way to utilize the government lands to do the production. That can be one solution, right? And remember, we went back and we talked about the government sector, private sector, to bring all this stuff back. I want people to reflect on that. So let's say, there was some a program that the government, the local municipal government, wind up creating. It would have to have made a political commitment towards becoming food sovereign. And a good part of that political commitment would therefore then have to be, what's the political base, the organic base that going to support this program? And there's two types of support. There's the labor support, and then there's the consumer support, right? Because you don't want the things going to waste, but you also got to make sure that there's sufficient enough labor to engage in the program for the agricultural yield, right? And then there's another question which is critical, because a lot of this would just be theoretical and hypothetical if you didn't deal with a couple of other factors that we got to deal with. Water and water access, right? And we got to have good, clean, accessible, affordable water to have access to.
Like the traffic also. I mean, Jackson's a city just like any other city, so it's like folks are gonna come here, and they eat, and stay for a little bit, might leave. I mean, like, but they're gonna need to eat though. So I don't know if like that would mean like producing more for other than just the population in Jackson, or just producing. But I don't know if that's okay.
Well, this is part of what I was going to get to, so you're jumping ahead. By this calculation, you're actually producing in excess. You're producing more than what the people of Jackson are going to consume. So then the question becomes, what do you do with that excess? Right? On the normal capitalist logic and relations, you would say sell it. Right? And you would therefore make, whatever this new kind of enterprise is would be a major, to a certain extent, could be a major food producer of its own and a food distributor of its own and create new markets. That may be a route that somebody wants to go.
Or it could be compost and use the soil rehabilitation, pollution and things like that.
I think, me personally, I think that would need to be a major piece of what's happening because of how rapidly industrial agriculture is depleting soils around the planet.
Right.
Yeah. Locally, and this is, I don't know how this would actually fit into this future that we're looking at, but there's one organization locally that, the biblical concept of gleaning, where you weren't supposed to clean your fields out.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a faith-based organization here that takes your excess. There's actually one that will come by anything that you have extra that you can't sell, that you can't use, whatever. They'll come take it and then they distribute it to
food pantries and stuff like that.
Homeless, directly to homeless as well as to food pantries and stuff like that.
What about the school system?
Government regulation. That's the problem with that.
And contract.
With the school system?
Yes. Yes, there is massive federal regulation of the farm to work program. It's really obnoxious.
Not all of it is bad. Some of it is,
not all of it is bad. It's just really
trying to
obnoxious.
protect kids in particular from damaged or contaminated food. So the intent, you would say some of the intent was good, but then what they do actually, allow in under these contracts sucks. But it's still, their main thing is not necessarily, there's some concern for nutritional value, but a lot of it winds up being, we just don't want to be sued for, some kid getting salmonella poison. Yeah, the liability part. Now, you might eat, corn, fructose corn in 5 different ways in one meal at a public school, and, that's contributing to diabetes and everything else. But it's safe. You're not going to die from it today,
Right.
So
Now,
that's
Steve,
their kind
I'm
of
having to
regulation.
restart, so you're solo for a second.
Oh, okay. So you kind of got that dynamic, but so coming to our question again, this is looking at what's the strength and weaknesses of the approach, and what I want us to get at is number one, to think to scale, because that's what the Jackson Kush plan is really about. Thinking to scale and thinking out of the box, right? To a certain extent, thinking out of the box. So one of the pieces that one of the things I know caused some heat with some folks, some of our, allies, was I recently stated in the article that I know Kingfish got a hold of and made some use out of, but was making this argument that one of the ways I would put forward that we can start exercising a certain level and have to start thinking about exercising a certain level of dual power has to be rooted in our ability to be food sovereign. Because if we're food sovereign, then you can make certain political decisions and not necessarily have to worry about, the state government cutting you off from this or cutting you off from that. If I got the ability to feed my own people soundly and securely and make sure everybody has the caloric intake they need and then some, I have tremendous political leverage over anybody, who wants to fuck with me, basically, on a certain level, within the confines of the system. But you have to then beg the question, well, how would the municipality organize itself to become food sovereign? What would it take, right? And one of the big things that we got to deal with, so there's a tradition of folks not wanting, particularly amongst African people here. I left farmers associated with slavery and sharecropping. I don't want to do that. I want to be associated with that. The memory of it is a trigger within itself. Huh?
Just in the city, outside in the outskirts, like in Raymond and Utica, there's a heavy farm community where people are still basically cultivating land.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying
Just the city.
I'm not saying it's universal, but the thing I would argue is that most of our people live in cities now.
Right.
I think it was 80% of black people in this country, for our last look, lived in cities. And the vast majority of people in America now live in some form of an urban environment, right? And what people who are actually engaged in farming in the United States constitute up 2 or 3% of the actual U.S. labor workforce now. So it's small. You get what I'm saying? And it's not just that it's black people. There's some particular things. That's who's primarily in Jackson. That's primarily what our focus is, that we got to overcome. And I think you can't discount culture as a barrier that you're gonna have to deal with. That's in what people's desires, aspirations are, what people's understanding of different forms of labor are, what's reserved for certain folks. So, for me, I don't have a stigma with, as an individual, I don't have a stigma with farming, but I know my grandparents did, but I do have a serious stigma as a child growing up with what would you call it, housekeeping, because some of my folks did that and got treated like shit, so I whenever I hear somebody, domestic labor, it gets me going in a particular way. It's a particular form of exploitation when I hear sometimes friends be like, oh, I need to get a daycare, somebody or domestic worker to do this. I'd be like, you're a class enemy to me. Automatically, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm like, you exploiting, that's an automatic point of it just brings a whole bunch, but it's also a psychological thing. You know what I'm saying? And so there's a history of that within, particularly in the African community, about all the different things we were forced to do, as a captive labor force here, that you're now asking people, you left the farm areas and the rural areas to come to Chicago, LA, New York, Detroit, Jackson. And now, because there's no jobs available for you, in this urban environment, or very limited jobs, I'm asking you to go back to, something that your ancestors ran from, left, so there's some psychological and cultural work that has to be done. And so I think for us, we just got to recognize that there's some serious struggle on that level that you're gonna have to overcome if you're gonna try to implement a program like this on any significant scale. And then the critical piece is, which gets to like the next question, right? And other things. One of the big pieces is, let's call it compensation, right? Let's call it compensation. Even in the capitalist economy, farming is not a lucrative business, right? And the big boys, you know, the big growers, the big meat packers, all that stuff, even they really survive off millions and billions of dollars of subsidy,
Yes, indeed.
tax subsidies and stuff like that.
But why though?
Hmm?
But why though?
Why?
Yeah, because it's like farming, you can't just farm the land continuously and make money. It's like, you can't do that. You're gonna strip the soil. So it's like, I mean, I think that's the reason it's not like people aren't getting rich or wealthy off of it. Which, I mean, I feel like there's avenues to get wealthy,
Mhm.
but like, yeah, farming is not, yeah, you can't like use the land just continuously.
That's one component of it. The other component of it, now, which brings us to the second question, which is a bridge. Even though it's an earlier form of industrialization, but the industrialization of agriculture took a lot of the bottom profit out of it, right? Because now I can get machines that can even do more damage to what they can do more damage quicker to the soil than a human could. And they can do it 3 or 4 times faster, you know, because you got to sleep, right? But so when you sleep, I can just put somebody else on that tractor and keep moving, keep going, you know, and I can be out here doing cultivating, tilling soil, which I've seen in California where I grew up, 24 hours a day, you know, and they out there doing tomato picking and all that other kind of stuff, 24 hours a day, you know, middle 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So that being industrialized took a lot of the bottom profit out of it as a, you know, and then the other part of it, which I would argue, Andrew, is at least in the United States, which I know, you know, the most, there was industrialization. So there was who had access to the capital to buy those tractors, beginning like in the 1920s and 30s. That was limited. That wiped a lot of folks out, particularly during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. A lot of people got wiped out because they just didn't have the finances to withstand, you know, the depression. So that left, you know, a group of middle-sized players, you know, on the market. And then it was how smart some of them were, or how tied in some of them were to the political powers of the day, right? So they could, you know, my cousin is the state, you know, senator, you know, and I'm in Kansas. So I'm gonna get protected because I got the political connection to get protected, you know, and to get resources from having that, to get government grants or whatever the situation because I'm in. But I'm from the farmer across the street who don't have nobody in office during a crisis, you know, to give me a grant or to open that door. I'm at a quote unquote competitive disadvantage to the person who's got that protection, right? Right.
And after the passage of the Farm Act, the Farm Bill during Roosevelt's period, whoever was the county extension agent,
Right,
wielded all the power in that county, just like a sheriff.
So, but the main point I was going to get to, Andrew, was just coming to, is that there was a period of consolidation, you know, and that period is not over; it's still going on, you know. So there may be small farmers who are doing chicken or doing corn or doing whatever, but you sell to a conglomerate for the most part if you want access to a market, and it's that conglomerate which determines the price. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like Dole is not making billions of dollars a year. You know what I'm saying? They're like Dole making money, right? And so in this field of agriculture, where you would say on the level of say like us doing it, there's no money. They are making profit hand over foot at the top scale by exploiting all of us. You know, by setting and determining prices that just work in their favor. So the point I was trying to get at is not necessarily that it's not still a lucrative business, because one of the things, everybody got to eat, right? So within the capitalist economy, there's money being exchanged, but how is that market structured, controlled? How is it regulated? You know, those are all the political mechanisms that you then got to look at, and not just, you know, quote unquote, where's the market at? That's a bullshit argument, you know, once you deconstruct the history of it. The markets within themselves don't decide. The political forces that determine how markets are even structured or created in any kind of market, period. But the question how it relates to us, I would argue, is, you know, and y'all know this from Freedom Forum, how are we gonna make a living from doing this? You get what I'm saying? Within the existing framework, how are we gonna make a sustainable living doing this? Right? And so on that level, trying to make it to scale, and say on the level of the municipality, they were trying to do something. So what, you know, how are they gonna make sure all those folks who are doing this farming are making, you know, real living wages? And this is where the broader question of the solidarity economy come in. If folks are not being compensated as we understand in the wages, what are other ways that they can be compensated to make sure that they are living a high quality of life? So everything may not need to be mediated through cash exchange. It could be mediated in other ways. Value could be exchanged in other ways. And so that's the kind of piece of what I want to get to with number two, is this piece of within our framework, right, of what Cooperation Jackson is trying to do with the community production. I want to put forth the question, and there's some links about, you know, once CPC fully gets off the ground, I don't want to deal with that headache with the building and stuff right now, but once that's rolling, we need to really sit and think through what are all the links, you know, for us, from farm to kitchen to production to recycling to composting. What are all the links? What are all the exchanges? How do we mediate the different values between all those different things internally? You know, how are we noting that? How are we, you know, dealing with that? Because if we left certain things strictly up to market logic, we would know that 1 cup of coffee don't equal 1 bushel of corn, per se, right? They're not necessarily the equivalent if I was to go to the Kroger or to Whole Foods, right? So, but how do we want to value that? Winds up becoming a central question that we have to really think through and grapple with.
Yeah. We need to determine, like, define what constitutes the high quality of life that we're striving for, and how much of that is within our capacity in this internal, you know, grouping of businesses and such. How much of that is within our capacity to fulfill? And then, you know, you can put whatever, you know, so this is, you know, our quality of life. It's X amount, this much of this, this much of this, this much of this, this much of all these different things for that person. And then, you know, in like a time banking sort of, you know, thing, you know, you've got, for each person, they've got access to that much of those different things, plus a little bit extra, because if you don't have, you know, because without being able to have like personal things, you know, entertainment, stuff like that, it warps the brain.
Like, that's one of the object lessons Joby and I's experience working in the community farm is that retrospectively, one of the downsides that killed it for us, you weren't allowed any time for yourself. You weren't allowed to just chill and do nothing. You weren't allowed to have time to sit in your room or house and just like meditate, to do, you know, art for no purpose. You know, it was all about production, survival, upkeep, you know, it was all work, basically. And that's a really, really important component, is people having their own space
Leisure time.
and a little bit of their own like mental space too, leisure time. That's it was very, this is like 7 years worth of analysis, but
So was that set up that way explicitly, or was that what was kind of required to make the project
a little
function?
bit of both. A little bit of both.
Okay, she was there a significant time less than I was. I was there 3.5 years. When I first moved there, there was a small number of people. There was 6 of us. And we made a point of taking time for ourselves. In the beginning, you know, we took time for, you know, yeah, there was at least a couple hours every day, and like 1 day a week where, like, you know, yeah, we didn't do stuff. I mean, it was an animal farm, so somebody had to be doing something every day. But we made sure to take time for ourselves. But then as things happened and more people showed up, more things that we wanted to do and accomplish, and the more complicated things got, it got to a point of, it started out with, well, you know, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. We need this, and this. You know, I want to see this, and, you know, there were all these big ideas that became more important than properly taking care of the people. Projects became more important than people.
The projects or the production, the productivity?
Yes.
Okay.
And by the time that I came, he was talking when he started, there were 6 people. By the time I came, there were 21 and a half residents, because there were technically 22, but he worked in the Gulf, actually. So he would only come back periodically. But we had 21 full-time residents. So there was also correspondingly, to a certain extent, you know, that much more work to do to survive.
So it sounds to me like there was the scale up question changed the dynamics.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. When it scaled up, it destroyed it, from my perspective. Yeah, when it scaled up, you know, the feeding that many people, clothing, you know, and feeding and housing that many people and maintaining everything to do with that, you know, the production needed to make that much more external money, the work around the property for things for ourselves and things to trade with, to barter and trade locally, you know, scaled up to a degree. And then, yeah, there were some other
Political dynamics.
interpersonal political dynamics that also caused issues. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think some, you know, any question of scale or any experience of trying to do anything to scale, the one exponential factor you always got to add in, to steal a phrase, more people equal more politics, right? And, you know, you're going to have to deal with the dynamics of all of those
Contradictions.
yeah, contradictions, converging and conflicting interests all at the same time. So, you know, none of these things can be taken out of, that's why I was arguing, you know, none of these things can be taken out of a political context or a cultural context. And to me, in a lot of respects, culture is a reflection of the politics, you know, within a group. So, and I think to me, it's critical for us to go back and look at all of these different types of experiments, and there's been a lot of them throughout history. What they did well and what they did, wrong, that didn't. Well, I don't think there's anything that's permanent anyway. But some things have lasted for generations. Some things, collapse within a generation. Have serious kind of founder syndrome systems or issues. But
That founded this.
I'm the only one who can control it, who knows how to make it work. And so I don't set up a leadership pathway. And when I leave, when I pass, whatever, after me crumbles.
Dictatorship.
And nobody's gonna do it how I envision it.
well, there's that. But then there's also,
Right.
but there's also,
No one knows like I know.
well, there's those are all valid points. But even objectively, even if say that those persons were fine, on that subjective level, are the relationships that they have passed on, right? The external relationships that they have passed on, are the skill sets that they accumulated and possessed, are those passed on? Were the contradictions within their operation, and there's no operation that don't have contradictions, were those mediated? Because you might have a situation where there's a bunch of competing interests, within the situation, and then once the founder or founders die, those competing interests go at it. They have a war. Who's going to seize power and take over the force, right? So you got all those dynamics which are there, and there's objective and subjective parts to any kind of situation of like how it's going to live on, right, and how it's going to go on. So, but beyond that, so one of the things I would want to point to is to give an example, to make it more concrete. How come what the Amish do isn't transformative to a certain extent beyond the Amish inside of their own community?
Because they're insular and religious.
Because it's based on a certain mentality.
Run by me.
Their mentality is steeped in their religion,
Right.
and their culture.
And a closed,
And their language.
and a language. It's like a closed group.
And
But it's
whether
in-
intentionally or intent, or like whether they did it on purpose or not, there's like, because they're closed, that lack of outside influence makes it harder for people to have a difference or divergent of opinions or viewpoints. If you're only been exposed to a certain number of viewpoints over a certain amount of time, it's harder for you to say, well, I want to do this. I mean, there are people who do that. They don't get allowed to come back after a while. That's for a reason, right?
Right.
The interest. I mean, we're talking about how you have different interests and people fight for different interests, but with them, it's like the interest is group interest. And then since there's not a lot of outside pressures or whatever, a lot of outside ideology, then it's able to flow smoothly.
It was interesting all y'all have pointed to the internal dynamics, which wasn't what the question was.
Oh,
They're also,
okay.
they live a really simple lifestyle that is contradictory to the standard American lifestyle. They're not
That's true.
interested in a bigger house. They're not interested in shinier technology. They're not interested in the latest toy. It's very much you have, from what I understand, it's very much you have what you need, but Americans are trained to live in excess and the Amish do not.
Mm-hmm.
And also they
Or
have,
at least not to the same extent.
but also they have a very cooperative, community-minded, community-based approach to things because they will build each other a barn. They will help with their plowing and all these kind of things.
But I mean, come
They
back.
have sewing bees.
What was the original question?
So why
But
do
let me-
nobody else copy it though if it works?
That's right.
They only know how to do it.
Well, no, there's
there's
other
other
people, there's other examples.
Because it would require you, like, to copy it in the same exact way as the Amish people are doing, or similarly. I think it would require a lot of what Fasanya was saying, like, they don't live in excess. It would require you to give up a lot of excess. We couldn't be sitting around a table full of computers right now, typing on a screen. If we were living the same life as the Amish, we'd have to give all that stuff up. We couldn't have our cell phones.
As they define it, but you may define it another way,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
But if you get that part of my question is why is it not transformed? So let
It
me,
goes back to the religious thing.
no, I would say it could, but so let me pose it another way, right? So, on average, by most indicators, the Amish actually have a higher quality of life than most people who live in the United States. And this is how long they live, you know. So with all the poor people in the United States, you know, why aren't they an example per se for other people to emulate? Like, I want to change my condition, right? Here's an example of how another group of folks have organized themselves to change their condition.
Because they
Right.
dress up.
Weird.
I mean, nobody wants to
I would say that
emulate
because they're weird. Yeah,
They're weird
Well,
looking.
and
we've
wasn't
been
there
conditioned to think they're weird.
wasn't there a campaign of persecution?
Campaigns of persecution, but mainly in
Like-
Europe, mainly in Europe.
There was one here too,
Yeah.
when schooling became mandatory. Because the thing, like the Amish, you start from childhood
Right.
working in
Right.
community. And it was the whole like Amish parents being prosecuted for child abuse maybe, or child,
There were different
exploitation
things.
or something
Yeah,
like
there was
that.
different things. I mean, and there's been different. Yeah, that's there. But I mean, the larger question is about the subtext to the question, and the larger question is about overall the logic of of capitalist orientation, right? And I would push on a certain level is that even though there is cooperative stuff, you're talking about giving this as a warning about us creating some false bubble, right?
Right.
Is that there's certain critical aspects of their existence which actually don't challenge capitalist logic, are in fact very much embedded in capitalist logic. And to a certain extent, because it didn't offer anything, or doesn't offer a systemic way of relating that is outside of that logic that you can adopt as a practice, unless you're a member of that particular culture, I can do that outside of having to believe in what you believe in, right? So it's not, there's other things which prohibit it, I would say, from being just transformative, because there's some things I think they're more on the right path of being more socialistic and cooperative, right? But it's within a framework that easily fits within the larger capitalist society and doesn't necessarily challenge the capitalist society and the logic of that society. That doesn't mean that they haven't made or attempted to make certain contributions to things that challenge the capitalist order or challenge the colonialist order. Their contributions, as flawed and as skewed as they were, to the Underground Railroad being one, right? That's an invaluable contribution despite all the contradictions that were there. And it was definitely, a challenge to a certain aspect of capitalism, right? Like, because technically what they were doing is freeing capital by aiding enslaved, African people to freedom. As far as the capitalist system, you letting one of my tools run away, and to think for itself in this case, right? and to make its own decisions. So, but there's much more to changing this overall exploitative system than just doing cooperative economics. That's my larger point. Or just doing ethnic solidarity or religious solidarity economics. There's a lot more that has to be broken if we're gonna go in another direction.
Because they still have like you said, some type of capitalism. Then because if you go like to North Mississippi, like going towards Hattiesburg, they have a big old like supermarket where they sell all of their produce, which is the excess that they have. Like what you were talking about with kind of like how we want to do it here. If we don't sell a certain amount of it, I mean, if we don't use a certain amount of it. So they have the same type of, you know what I'm saying, get down.
Right. And so the deeper questions of how do we, that I don't have, I don't know.
For their internal consumption, yes. For sale outside of the community, not necessarily.
You might have fertilizers.
But you know, when you go to the thing down,
Yeah,
like,
I living in West Virginia. I talked to a few Amish because there was an Amish thing, and it varies group to group. It can vary group to group,
right.
but it is not required to grow organically if the field is dedicated solely to produce food for those in outside of the
The one in Hattiesburg is started like going towards Hattiesburg. It has big signs that say organic food.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess it's just like depends.
It
on-
depends.
It's the choice of the group and the dynamics of the market that they're putting the food into. If that market don't care and they can make more money not doing it organic, whatever.
So they are cannabis.
Feed the heathens, whatever.
One of my union brothers, one brother is an organic inspector in Oregon, and he goes all over the place. And I know he has gone to Amish farms and stuff, and because he told the story one time, he had to dress a certain way. He had to like start like to stay in the community long enough to do the work he had, the inspections he had to do to certify them.
Mhm.
He had to like adopt their dress forms and then go to sleep when they did and stuff.
Right. Or at least turn the lights off. So, but coming back to this, so that there's a dynamics of, so there, what I'm just trying to do, put out, and I know people will be watching this and folks will join in with us, is we in an odd place, I think, of what we conceptually trying to do. Because there is no way that Cooperation Jackson in the early stages, and we still very much in some early stages, the initial stages of what we're going to create will likely be very bubblish, right? Like very internal. But we don't want to stay there, and we can't stay there. But we also don't want to repeat necessarily the dynamics that Joby was speaking about, like, you know, where growth becomes a dynamic in and of itself, for itself, which is, again, repeating capitalist logic and growth. And then you wind up having certain kind of dynamics, you know, that take over, that are beyond, per se, our objective control to fulfill that logic, right? And to, you know, make ends meet, quote unquote. So us growing exponentially has to be in a way that can be embraced by folks who are not necessarily in this room or in our space, but they have to form enough of what I would argue a coherent logic where people engaging in it makes sense as a way of fulfilling first their basic needs, but then also changing and transforming social relationships. So that's how we have to figure out, like, how do we not perpetuate capitalist logic? How do we actually change it and replace it with a new type of communal social logic? And that's easier said than done. You know, much easier said than done, But at least like through these sessions, it's setting us up to set us up collectively to have a clear understanding of where we want to go and what the pitfalls might be as we cross new steps on the road, to be like, well, this actually going to lead us away from where we wanted to go. If we make this turn, it'll be some hardships, but it'll actually help us get to where we want to go, right? And to be clear about that and have as much foresight about what that road looks like as possible. Yeah, something. Okay. But for the day, so we're gonna run out of time as per usual. I do want us to look at. There's a couple of questions in number 2 that I want us to start looking at and dealing with. So I'll start with the one I think is the most critical and try to focus on these. So, how does the demand and organizing impetus for food sovereignty relate to the demand for tech democracy or technological democracy? How does the demand for food democracy empower the working class? How does the demand for community production and technological democracy or tech democracy empower the working class? So these are things I want us to grapple with. And there's 2 things. There's the demand, and then there's the organizing impetus. And what I was trying to get at that is, demand is what we make on society, in particular the government and the forces of capital which dominate the society. So there's a demand for change, a demand to end the exploitive ways. That demand will only be met to the extent that we are strong. We have some strength. So the organizing impetus cannot be ignored, because otherwise it's just an empty phrase. It's just an empty slogan, right? So us organizing toward that on our own to realize what we're asking for, whether they surrender it or not, becomes, a critical component, right? So us starting to just do like we're trying to do with everything, but in this case, like with CPC, technological democracy. And there's a concept that I want to work on and try to introduce. I've talked to Jassy and Amalia about it a little bit, and I'll raise it here. It's not fully thought out or baked, but it's just something that beginning to emerge is this concept of what I'm calling you have the digital divide. There's a piece that I want to argue for, that there's an emerging production divide, right? In that you have technologies like 3D printing, which are relatively cheap in the history of industrial development. To produce one factory used to cost millions and millions of dollars, even in the 19th century, right? Now you can do certain types of things that was even unimaginable with small computers and the printer for $2,000 or $3,000, right? But that doesn't mean that Black folks, working class folks, right now, even though the technology is available, are accessing these things. And the gap between those who will have access to those things and those who don't is going to be a growing divide, right? So us starting to articulate this is this whole notion of a production divide is to try to inform our own people in the consciousness of the social movements that we belong to, that this is something you need to be concerned with and engage in some level. So we're not left out of the equation, or this is used to exploit us and hurt us in some particular manner, which the other forms of industrialization have been. But the other piece is to start really formulating that as a programmatic design of what the movements should be getting into, right? So there's a demand component, and then there's this organizing component. But the whole concept of it is that even though these things are relatively cheap, there's no education that's being provided that we should be into this, or this is something that we can access. Like there's a big gap around just knowledge sharing and development, at least within the Black community, and I would say most working class communities, despite how cheap this whole thing is. Then the other thing is to have a deeper conversation and link the conversation about what's happening, particularly the Black folks in this country. Like understand where this technology is going in relationship to your own growing disposability.
Right.
Right, and that the more this shit, advances and develops, the less and less they're gonna need our labor, which has already been in decline for the last 50, 60 years anyway, right, in different forms of fashion. So if we don't get into an element of controlling it now, at its those who control this technology will be at their control. And to the extent, what was that? We shared a video. I've seen more since about them using somebody innovating ways for automated machines to actually do agriculture now. Remember, I think I sent y'all something with the little machine. I've seen a bigger one, a larger scale one.
The robotic farmer?
Yeah, the robotic farming stuff. I've seen some much bigger ones that this is already in use in production
Also,
in a couple
they
of
were
places.
talking about brick mason. Like they were showing automated machine actually
Making bricks?
making
Laying
brick
bricks.
and laying bricks. Making a house. I was like, what? Like,
Yeah.
Not just laying the concrete, but laying bricks.
like laying bricks, like actually building a house.
You got folks in Nigeria that still making individual bricks by hand.
By hand, right.
Right.
Within the next 8 years, they're talking about starting to use trucks on docks in the ports that drive themselves, and there'd be somebody up in the tower playing a video game. Like,
No, they already there.
Tesla got
Yeah, they're already there. Amazon
Google
did a
got
test.
the
And,
automated
yeah,
trucks.
Yeah, Google got the
Yeah.
automated job. It just dropped. It's fully self-driving.
But I want to get to this question in relation to the trend of CPC and freedom farms, for lack of a better way of putting it, for what you're talking about, tech democracy and food sovereignty. Because there's a couple of different ways I can think about that, but I'm trying to look at partially. I want to look at what you're asking, which is I think you want the CPC to serve as basically developing technologies to support not only food sovereignty, but all of our needs. And I'm just kind of talking because I've been mulling over this and trying to figure out, one, what you were asking, but also what that could and would actually look at. So I guess my first question is that where you're kind of going?
Is that not for us? There's that immediate practical thing for us,
Right.
but on a larger level, because what I want us to think about always is we have the burden of scale.
Right. And when I think about scale, I also think about this digital fabrication technology, and ultimately it would have to serve essentially the needs of just replicating something akin to the society that we're used to, or at least the material society that we're used to living in, right? So not just one-off goods of producing tools for farming per se. We already seen the ability to make houses and stuff like that, but what about, roads, sewage, whatever, because if you are mounting a serious challenge to capital and capital starts to move out, then you're responsible. You
right.
better be.
That's right.
And how do you take care of that? I guess my thought around is where the technology is right now. It's really only designed practically to make prototypes. We would not only have to learn it to make effective prototypes on the scale that we would need immediately, but also then learn how to make larger productive capacity out of the technology to take care of larger and growing needs, as you're talking about that exponential growth with food sovereignty, or just with the economy that we're looking to create. You know what I mean? And that takes, at least in my understanding, more capacity in the technology that we have. And skill.
But I want to bring it back to the political. So you brought up a point back that was important about capital flight. Let's call it that, right? Capital flight is a serious limitation that any progressive force has to deal with. you know, on the level of like municipalism that, for lack of a better term, that we've been engaged in here with in Jackson, right? Particularly with the electoral arena. And, you know, we have to ask ourselves a serious question, you know, let me put it, those people who from the vantage point of the Jackson-Kush plan, those people who really believe in the Jackson-Kush plan, how does each particular move help us advance that plan? Right? How does it help us get to sovereignty and self-determination overall? Food sovereignty is just one component of, you know, a programmatic end of it, but it can't be detached from the overall larger political goals. Because trust me, if and when we make a serious move like that, you're threatening the livelihood of some major sectors of capital. You're putting, you know, Whole Foods and Kroger and all the rest of them, you posing a serious threat if you're doing something in a way that is both cheaper and or you know, free, but mediated through some form of other exchange. They're gonna come with all their legal guns. They're gonna come with all their political muscle, you know, to upend that and find some way for you not to do it. So there's no way in hell you're gonna even. We need to be clear. There's no way in hell to fight with this without engaging in a serious political fight.
Political struggle, yeah.
Right? It's pie in the sky to even conceive of this without being prepared to wage in some serious political struggle. So it's not just getting people prepared on the labor question, it's getting people prepared on the political question. To what extent are you willing to actually sacrifice to make this happen? To what extent is actually having sovereignty and self-determination, you know, worth the political cost that you're going to be forced to deal with on the front end? Businesses leaving, you know, jobs leaving, because all that, if there's serious moves that are made, you know, towards self-determination by any of us, you know, it's going to be backlash, it's going to be heat. And so how do we get ourselves mentally, and then more importantly, you know, what are the steps to the things that we have to do to get ready for that struggle? You know, will we have food? Will we have water? Will we have shelter? Will we have energy? What have we done to make sure that when we make certain decisions, I can make that decision because I'm pretty much sure that I can take care of myself. Right? I'm not bluffing. I'm not lying. I'm not like, well, I didn't know y'all was gonna leave and turn off the lights if I made this decision, you know. So I really didn't mean it, or I didn't mean to come off that way, whatever the situation is.
I think that one of the major things about the relationship with food sovereignty to empowering the working class is that people don't make demands because the hammer of starvation is hanging over their head.
That's right.
So, for example, if somebody goes on strike to get a union or get something better, one of the major reasons that fails and people go back to work without their demands getting met is because they run out of food. They run out of money for food. They run out of things that are needed. Well, if we had with the farm, for example, a program to make sure strikers got fed, right? The labor conditions and wage and hour working conditions, health and safety, all these kind of things could be enforced. And if you had a labor movement then that was able to stop the capital flight, occupy that plant, don't let them take the machinery out of it.
Or destroy the machine.
Or destroy the machinery. See, that's where it's all, the body has to be strong to do those things. I'm talking about the collective body and the physical individual body.
That's where I was looking. When you say that, I think about the commercial that I saw on WLBT when they were talking about like the union and whatnot and how they were putting it out there. They were basically telling the people what you were just saying.
We'll starve you.
We'll starve you. Because they was like
that's the
before they came, it was then, and you know what I'm saying? Now we have jobs, we have this money, and we have all these things, and don't ruin it. Don't ruin it. Just vote no and go back to work.
That's
So,
crazy. I didn't see it yet.
They didn't necessarily say
Oh,
that.
they don't. You can look at them on I think on
I've
YouTube.
heard a couple of radio versions of that, yeah.
They weren't necessarily saying it in those words, but what they were doing, what they were implying, they were like, remember how things were before we got here. Remember how you used to live. Remember what I've done for you.
What I've done for you.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I've taken all your taxes.
I mean, so anyway, the larger question, and we'll pick back up on the next session. We're about to run out of time. Folks to really think about the like what it would really take for 1 and 2 and the overall concept. We just kind of touched the surface. But you know, my point is this is where we said we want to go. Are we organizing ourselves to get there? Like no bullshit. If this is where you want to go, you know, are we organizing ourselves to get there? And what is that really going to take? What's the thought? You know, first you got to do the thought layout. I'm gonna need this. I'm gonna need that. I'm gonna need X, Y, and Z. And there's a level of depth and seriousness that we all need to undertake, whatever level we think we may be, to get ready and you know, collectively encourage and push ourselves to be accountable towards moving towards this vision and what type of sacrifices and discipline is that going to take. You know, and I just had to bring back examples. One, particularly because it's, you know, it's Black August. It's the second day of Black August. You know, the example of Haiti and, you know, what they went through during that period to get free, I think is illustrated, you know. And it's not necessarily that they had everything worked out when they decided to rebel, because trust me, they didn't. But the one thing I think that they clearly had was, I ain't going back, you know. And if you, to be honest with you, there was a period, even in the Haitian Revolution, when the struggle was looking pretty tough. And some of the generals, including Toussaint, were willing to kind of go back to the plantation, right? They will say, well, as long as it ain't that bad, you know, because we hurting out here, you know, fighting these folks. So, you know, y'all are just to make some minor improvements. You know, we might go back. But when the slave owners are, we ain't changing shit, they was then clear, like, all right, it's all in now, you know. We done started this shit. We might as well, you know, finish it. And they kept going back and forth, you know, to a certain extent. But you know, and I think you look at the questions. You know, folks have heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. You know, all of the different kind of contradictions any revolutionary, you know, serious social movement wants to face, I think, are in that struggle, particularly looking at, you know, how Toussaint got captured and why he got captured, in part not wanting to get into another major battle against Napoleon, you know, and believing that Napoleon, to some extent, was also a believer in, you know, the aims and objectives of the French Revolution, because in part he claimed that's what he was about. But fell for that trick. But a part of the thinking was, you know, I don't want to be alone, you know, against the British. I don't want to be alone against the Americans. You know, I don't want to be alone against the Spanish on the other side of this island. You know, so I need some friends, right? So it wasn't just that it was like a sellout mood. It was like him at least growing to understand the international economy is like, yeah, we defeated all of them, but they could come back, you know, or they will come back. Ain't not that they could, they would, knowing that they would come back. But it's why also, to a certain extent, why you need a Dessalines on your team, or a few of them, you know, that have somebody to be like, look, you better look at reality square in the face and recognize these people ain't gonna ever see us as equals. That was his point. They ain't gonna never, you know, we got to win this and finish this, and then we might be able to negotiate on our terms. But until such time, they gonna try to put us back on the plantation. Don't
And it's
make
gonna
no,
involve guillotine.
yeah, and then don't make no, you know, mistake about it. Was his message, and I
It's
think.
interesting to say that, because I never looked at it like that.
What you mean?
Looking at it like he was thinking so far ahead to the point where he was like, 'cause I always thought like he just wanted the French love. But I see now, that, you know what I'm saying? Because I was like, why would you go to these guys? And they told him like, don't go. And he was like, I gotta go. And then when he said that, I was thinking like, dang, that's right. Like he's probably thinking like, man, I got these people over here, these people over there, and yeah, we winning today, but we can say tomorrow that someone said, and we're gonna have to need some friends. So I'm gonna go over here and hopefully they'll respect my muscle. And you know, but at the end of the day,
There's all those
Yeah,
things,
and then
but
plus it's an island. They got to trade with somebody.
yeah, they don't have everything that
They
they
don't
need.
have everything that they need.
Right. And there's bigger boys out there. The Americans is right to your north. They practice slavery,
Republic.
right? They want to invade you. The British at that time already was the dominant power on the seas in the world. And remind you, they had already fought the Americans and the British to a certain extent and defeated them both. But is that a permanent defeat? I think Toussaint, if I was in his situation, like, okay, I might have beat this little army that came here, but I ain't burned down Washington D.C., which means they're gonna regroup and come back. I ain't got. Let me be clear.
It's still a threat.
It's still a threat.
It's still a threat.
It's still a threat.
I won, like I said, I won today.
Yeah.
But who's to say when the sun?
Yeah, I won the battle. But
it was a
it's
pure
war,
victory.
So that's what I'm saying. Some people always want to say, "Well, Toussaint was a sellout." I even thought at one point in time.
I really thought that.
No, you gotta. Toussaint was trying to figure out, like, I'm limited. I got limited options here.
He really just got played.
That's all I know.
No,
He got played.
Like,
no, it was more than being played. He knew what he was.
I mean, he got played because they called him. He thought that he was coming there to try to like negotiate. He went some stuff out. He went. Like he got played. Like, it was like,
what was he gonna do?
It's
Like,
cool, come
what was
through.
it? I mean,
talk,
it was the
chit
window.
chat.
Now that I think
That's
about it,
right.
like, what were you gonna do?
It's like I ever seen
What
Game
you
of
gonna
Thrones.
What you mean? What
It
you
was
gonna
like the
do?
Red
I
Wedding.
mean,
Like,
like,
he came,
okay,
he was like, it's gonna
we
be
can say
cool.
John Jack
They were
Dessalines
trying-
had right. But what if Napoleon would have negotiated? Would we still be looking at Toussaint like, oh, well, you this and that? He had to go out on the limb.
But yeah,
Sometimes
he
faith
was.
is like that. You don't know.
But at a certain point,
What made him think he was in a position to go to you?
well,
Probably because he felt like he was loved by the French. He
No,
spoke as a
No,
Frenchman.
he knew better than that. The thing was, you got to look at it. This goes
Not
back.
love, but respect.
This goes back to our central points, right?
I beat your tail.
That was a low-scale industrial struggle. Don't forget that.
Right.
And what Toussaint, as the dominant general, has to recognize, all right, they done sent a whole armada here with provisions of cannon, arms, bullets, food. They got international ties and relationships that I don't have. Access to capital that I don't have. Access to credit that I don't have.
Access to travel even.
Yeah.
They don't have.
Yeah, access to travel I don't have. And so I don't make no bullets here. Remember that. Or even if they were, it's not to the same extent that the Americans, the British, and the French were making bullets.
And the Spanish.
Right, in the Spanish, and you got to sit there at a certain point calculate. I got so many men, so many women in my army. They done brought a fleet which is about the size of my army. So it's two equal forces on field of battle here. and I'm outsupplied. I'm outarmed. I'm essentially outgunned.
I'm out, man.
Right. So, you know, let me try to see if we're on the same side. Right. Let me try to see if we're on the same side. And they had discussions about it. You know, it wasn't, you know, Dessalines actually showed up for one of the initial French reporting when Napoleon and then got off, you know, his forces got off. He actually did show up at one of the things, and they said that this is how they were going to play. He actually showed up. And for a minute, they even played like he was loyal. He played like, I'm going to be loyal to the French. So for him, it was like, I'm going to be loyal to the French so I can get up out of here and run to the mountains and regroup. That was his ultimate thinking of what he did. You know, and Toussaint, I don't know if he felt like I just can't beat this, but he's just trying to think of like, you know, am I willing to kill everybody in my army? Or am I, you know, going to try to fight for another day?
Right.
And I think he clearly,
it's like a union negotiation.
yeah, he was trying to fight for another day, live and fight for another day. So, but my point is only history could let me put it this way.
He was trying to get a contract that was a temporary truce.
Right. But my point is there was no right or wrong answer to a certain extent in that particular moment. Right. And we need to recognize that. But the deeper point of why there was no right or wrong answer, because we can't just stay, we cannot stay in the subjective realm of just thinking these choices are purely mediated by their will.
Or abstract.
Right? These choices are mediated by real concrete things. Like if I was sitting in the general, I'd be like, okay, look, I'm gonna have to be honest with y'all. I don't think we can win.
Straight up. Straight up.
Under these odds and under these circumstances, I don't think we can win.
How can you go and tell these people who just did all that?
No, but this is what it. But this is what it.
The reality.
Yeah, this is the reality.
What else you gonna tell them? We got this, y'all.
Liberty or death.
No, but this is one of the things about, you know, like if you ever get a chance to read The Art of War, read it.
Right.
Because one of the things that he always made clear at the end of the day, like if you choose to engage in warfare, in an armed conflict, make sure that there is no exit in your own mind. Right? So good. What I mean by that? So like when who was it? Cortez invaded Mexico. He burnt all his own ships.
Gang lead.
So his own soldiers. So his own soldiers wouldn't be like, we gonna, you know, like, yeah, man, we.
Are you talking about Cortez the Conqueror?
Yeah, Cortez the Conqueror.
Yeah.
It's because he was already having some mutiny in his own ranks, right? And folks was like, you know, this shit ain't the gold here, ain't what you promised.
This ain't what Elizabeth
you said it was riches and all this shit here, and I want to go home. You know, fuck this jungle and this collar and you know, yeah. I ain't dressed for this shit. Yeah, so he had to, you know, he was like, look, I came here for one mission. Y'all said y'all signed up for the mission. Now you're having second thoughts. He gave us to burn all them ships. We ain't going no fucking place. So the soldiers got the clear sense then. We better kill all the goddamn everybody in this motherfucker, because that's the only way we gonna come out of this alive. So the motivation was clear at that point. Like there ain't no going back. There ain't no retreat. Right? That was the point. The same point that Sun Tzu was arguing there. It's like make the choice to yourself and the enemy clear. Right? And if people are thinking I can, you know, if you're gonna engage in that and you're thinking there's a retreat, you know, that the ultimate aim and objective, you always, almost to a certain extent, set yourself up to lose.
Right.
You know, you're almost setting yourself up to lose. So that's why I'm saying that somebody like Dessalines in your camp is necessary. Even if you don't necessarily always follow the advice, you know, at least somebody in the ear, you're like, look, yo, them bosses ain't gonna never respect us, man. They ain't gonna never give us this contract, you know. So you can go down and negotiate all the fuck you want. I'm gonna go talk to the soldiers and tell people, you know, get your food ready, You know,
The alternative.
yeah, we need to get ready. It's gonna be long, hard. We may have to burn this shit down.
Right.
You know, we may have to burn this factory down before it's all said and done. You know, somebody needs to be there to do that. Because the negotiation might work, right? And particularly if the folks are clear, like, you know, you walk in and my boy Dessalines say, if y'all don't consent, we burning the shit down tomorrow. Now I don't want to do that, boss, you know, but you know,
We breaking shit down tomorrow.
hey, you
My
know,
arms are tied.
yeah, my arm is tied, you know, my folks ready to roll, you know. So they got
I'm the
yeah, I
backup
can't
plan,
control.
really.
I'm really here for you.
Right.
You best negotiate with me, because you know they ready. You know,
Going back to the horde,
Yeah.
if you agree to X, Y, and Z.
yeah,
You
you
ain't willing
ready.
to agree to that, then
Yeah, but when they know they ain't no whore, you know, fuck you. You know, I'm gonna do what I want.
Power only respects it.
Yeah, you know. So if you're gonna make that threat, it better be real. That's the other
It all
part.
depends on the relationship.
Yeah. It better be real. But anyway, so coming back to this, just to all of our stuff. These are everything we're talking about is embedded. All those points and all that history is embedded in all these questions. You know, and the piece around the food sovereignty in, if we can achieve that, it gives us a great deal of leverage.
That's right.
That's the central point. And the community production is the same thing, but in a slightly different direction. You know, but one of the things I would point to is you know, I think it behooves us, Joshua, to answer your question. Is not only do we want to take control or gain access and take control of this new technology, but it's incumbent upon us to advance it, actually. Right. To advance it to our advantage, to the point, you know, like what Blair was saying, you know, can we take the materials in our own local environment and use those as you know, our own supply chain, as opposed to, you know, having to buy the materials from someplace else and have it shipped in here. You know, because ultimately you're thinking about it in the context of conflict of you know, different forces. You know, we need to be thinking that far down the road, like, you know, what happens if and when I make this decision towards actually moving towards sovereignty and self-determination. I know that there's going to be repercussions for that. Am I prepared for that? Or am I at least preparing myself? Do I see the road, and then am I going to take the appropriate steps? Of this year I'm going to have this year I'm going to have this year. And that don't have to be all, you know, public or anything like that, but you know, you got a plan and the team is working a plan to be moving here. And I think we need to be thinking, we got to be thinking in this regard, particularly in relationship to you know, all this technology and just our own, you know, life, because you know, I'm gonna say it again. Capitalism is not a system anymore that is about creating employment for damn near anybody.
Right.
It's past that phase. You know, so it's really becoming for most people in the world, it's already, you know, life or death question. But now we in the heart of capital, in the heart of Babylon, and the reverberations are happening here for us too. So we need to get real about it. But at the end of the day, we'll pick up. We already went a few minutes over. You know, folks got to get to work. So we'll pick up on number 3 and then go from there, and then come back to these points. But you know, and then hopefully by next week, there'll be at least some outline of this whole notion of the production divide thing that we can talk about, me and Jossie and Amaya. Hopefully have some stuff done by that time. All right.
You bet.